Hello, Dual Language PLC participants. I wanted to take an opportunity to review the language objective structure learning that we had done in the month of November, as we have some required bringbacks to our next PLC happening in January, and I wanted to ensure that everyone that wasn't able to attend in November has the opportunity to learn. So we will be talking about language objective structures. And the thing that makes a language objective as different from an ICANN or just a regular content objective is that it actually takes language into consideration, which is really crucial for all of our students who are learning academic language in the classroom, which we believe is all of our students. It's very simple to do. It does not require a big shift in thinking at all. It just requires a little bit deeper thinking around what we're asking our kids to do and what that really means. So let's get started and take a look at what language objectives look like. Okay, so the first thing I want you to think about in the very first dot is the statement. Compare narrative points of view in extended texts using graphic organizers with a partner. So what we really want to think about is what is it that we actually want students to be able to do linguistically? What is the language that they're going to need to be able to do that? And you can see that the highlighted word is compare. So we have to think about what does it really mean to compare something? What is the language that's involved in comparison? Well, let's take a look at the Colorín Colorado Language Functions resource to deconstruct what comparison means linguistically. So we can see down here by my cursor that comparing actually means that our students will be distinguishing, comparing, contrasting, grouping, identifying a variety of tasks associated with comparison. We may want our students to use Venn diagrams, some kind of T-chart, maybe some fact and opinion charts. But one of the next things we want to really focus on is the language. So the language of comparison might require students to show how something is the same and different. And a lot of our kids are really used to that language. This is similar to this, and this is different from that. If we rely only on the language that students bring to school for comparison, like similar and different, it's not going to be sufficient for our students to achieve academic literacy. We want to also expose our children through our conferring and our small group instruction with the opportunity to use more complex constructs like however, like conversely, like nonetheless, regardless, in spite of this. All things that native speakers of English begin to develop over time, but that some of our students who are not learning their target academic language in the community may not have access to. And I would also say some students that don't have access to adults that speak in that way or who are reading texts that offer that language may also not be accessing that language. And so one of the things that we want to do is really stretch our students from what they can do when they show up at school and what they can do as a result of schooling. So we focus on the language of comparison. We can also focus on how to build sentence frames. So if we'd like to ask how are blank and blank the same, we could help our students by saying blank is the same as blank. Conversely, blank is different from blank. And that is a way for us to be able to support our students both cognitively and linguistically. Okay, the next part of a language objective includes identifying exactly what we want them to do in the content area. And in this case, we want them to to compare narrative points of view in extended text. That content stem comes directly from the Common Core standards and or could have come from the National Science Standards. What we know sometimes about our ICANN statements in our classrooms is that they have, unfortunately, very loose connections to standards sometimes. And when that happens, it makes it kind of difficult to think about what it is that students need to do linguistically. A very recent ICANN statement discovered in a classroom was I can read and write down my page numbers. And when you ask yourself, what do kids have to do with language to be able to do that? They might need to know how to abbreviate page. They might need to know how to order their entries on a log, but really it wasn't a content STEM I can statement, and it made it very difficult to be able to create a language objective. So the next part of a language objective is the content STEM. So let's review. We've already talked about the content STEM and what it is we want the kids to do linguistically with that content STEM. The next phase is to look at the supports. A language objective always includes specific supports. And this is one of the biggest reasons why we're asking our entire organization in dual language and English language development to look at language objectives. One of the very noticeable realities in dual language and ESL environments is the feeling on the part of the teacher that all strategies are equal in terms of acquiring language. So you may have noticed you walk into a classroom, you can see total physical response. You might see dictado going on. You might see turn-in talks. You might see think, frame, pair, share. You might see a borrowing table. You might see the stronger, clearer strategy. There are a variety of things that could be happening. That can be very stressful for a teacher to think or to tell herself that all of those things are required to happen simultaneously in every lesson. A language objective actually supports the teacher in understanding exactly what the support needs to be in place in order for the kid to achieve the objective of the lesson. It doesn't mean every strategy in the kitchen sink. It really means specifically what am I going to do to ensure that all kids can compare narrative points of view in extended text. In this case, the teacher has determined that how she's going to have students compare narrative points of view in extended text was by using a graphic organizer, and that they were going to be using a graphic organizer with their bilingual pair. And that was it. So that is the support that was determined to be necessary for this particular learning. So let's take a look at the different kinds of supports that are available. We have sensory supports, which allow students to access things through their touch, their sight, their feeling, smelling, etc. We've got graphic supports, which are favorites of teachers, graphic organizers, anchor charts, all kinds of ways of organizing cognition. And then we've got interactive linguistic supports. Interactive linguistic supports are bilingual pairs. They are total physical response. They are cooperative learning. They are instruction in through to language, like the bridging and the metalinguistic awareness and the analysis that goes along with that. They also include think, frame, pair, share. They include sentence frames. All of that is really located there. So there are 3 different main kinds of supports that a teacher could go to that would help them to really ask themselves, are these things going to be sufficient for all of my learners to be able to compare narrative points of view? So here's an example from the field. I can show my thinking in my thoughtful log by retelling a personal connection to an event in the text. So think quickly. What do students need to do with language to show their thinking in that thoughtful log? Okay, I'm hoping that you're thinking that what they need to do to show their thinking is by retelling. And retelling a personal connection to an event in the text is probably going to include some kind of sequential or text structure dependent retelling. So if it is a piece of literature, they may retell in a sequential way a similar event that happened to them in their personal lives, usually including a beginning, a middle, and end. It could also include a beginning and like a rising conflict and a resolution, depending upon the grade level of the student. Retelling could also mean, for example, if they're reading an informational text, some type of cause and effect language. For example, when I was on a piece of ice, I also slipped, just like the polar bear slipped jumping between icebergs, something like that. So retelling is one of those things that can be sequential, and it could also be dependent on the structure of the texts, and in that way it could be a little bit more specific. So we can go back to that colorín colorado table and think about retelling. And retelling, if we're trying to inform, might include having our students use descriptive language and adjectives. The book says, first this is what happened, and then there's all kinds of language that goes into that. And I think that one thing that we'd have to really focus on is using our teachers' power of conferring to be able to support students using incredibly more complex language at the word level. Commonly asked questions: retell the story in your own words, summarizing, reporting your findings, describing the main character. All of those things could be supportive and helpful. But I go here to the tasks associated with the informing or the retelling. We may have students doing all of these types of things. What we really want teachers to do is think about exactly what it is that kids need to be able to do with their language, and then think about what are the supports that they would need to do it. So if we want kids to be able to retell, what are some supports that we might use? Would we use total physical response to retell? Would we use dictado to retell? How about a turn and talk? Would a turn and talk be sufficient for students to adopt the retelling language that we wanted? What about a turn and a talk with a specific bilingual pair? How about a turn and talk with a bilingual pair that also includes anchor language to use? Even a graphic organizer created on an anchor chart. Let's take it another piece further. We've got a bilingual pair, we've got an anchor chart with keywords. What about some sentence frames? We're moving slowly into think, frame, pair, share, and then we may even be able to achieve the stronger, clearer. So here's your task. With a partner, we'd like you to snap a photo of some language objectives in some classrooms, and we want you to really discuss the language that is required to accomplish the task. We want you to use the Colorín Colorado table as a support. What we want you to do is determine a language objective that includes all three parts of a language objective: the content, the function preceding it, and the support following it. So, what function will students do with the language? What is the content they're trying to learn? And what are the supports that are appropriate to help them to achieve that? We really hope in studying this that our teachers will feel a lot less pressure to throw in every random oracy strategy that they can think of, but instead will become much more focused and strategic around the language and the academic literacy they want students to achieve through oral language. Okay, well, thank you so much, and we will see you in January.